Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're digging into something really vital for keeping up these days. The skill of unlearning.
Yeah, it sounds a bit counterintuitive, maybe.
It does, but think about it. We're always learning, taking in new information.
Hmm.
Doesn't it stand to reason that letting go of old ideas, things that aren't true anymore, is just as important?
Absolutely. We focus so much on the learning part, but honestly, being able to look at what we think we know and say, hang on, is that so right? That's key.
Hmm.
It's not really forgetting, it's more like updating your mental software, bit of a declutter.
Updating the software. I like that. And who hasn't felt that information overload, right? Like you're drowning in
Oh,
stuff.
constantly.
So our aim today is to cut through some of that. We've pulled together insights from, all over psychology, education, business, tech, even culture.
Yeah, to really understand why unlearning matters so much and, crucially, how you can actually get better at it yourself.
Exactly. So let's get into it. Where do we start? The brain.
Makes sense. Let's think about how our brains actually form habits and beliefs. We create these connections, these neural pathways every time we learn.
Right.
And the paths we use a lot, they get stronger, faster, more efficient, which is great for, driving or tying your shoes.
Sure. Automatic stuff.
But it makes it tough when we need to change course,
Yeah.
when we need to unlearn something.
It's like that worn path in the grass, isn't it? Easier to just keep walking on it, even if there's a paved path nearby.
That's a perfect analogy. Weakening that old worn path and building a new one takes real conscious effort.
Mhm.
And it's not just the brain's wiring, there's an emotional side too, right? Our identity. Sometimes letting go of a belief feels like losing a bit of ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. It can feel like admitting you were wrong, which, let's be honest, isn't always easy.
Not at all.
But isn't there also that satisfaction, that pride in having learned something in the first place?
Mm.
How do you square that with needing to potentially discard it later?
That's a really good point. It's about shifting your perspective, I think. Valuing being accurate now and being able to grow more than protecting a past belief. Seeing that flexibility as a strength.
Okay.
Plus, we have these mental shortcuts, these cognitive biases that actually work against unlearning, like confirmation bias.
Ah, yes. The tendency to look for stuff that proves us right.
Exactly. We seek out info that fits what we already think and ignore or downplay anything that doesn't. It's why echo chambers online are so powerful.
Right. Makes sense.
Then you've got status quo bias, just preferring things to stay the same. It's comfortable, familiar.
Even if change would be better.
Mm-hmm. And belief perseverance, that's when we cling on to an idea even when we're shown solid evidence it's wrong. It's like these biases are mental glue, making old ideas stick tight.
Okay, so we've got the brain's efficiency, our ego, and these biases all kind of working against us. How do we fight back? How do we start unsticking that glue?
It really does take conscious work. Critical self-reflection is huge. Asking yourself why you believe something, what's the evidence, is it still valid?
Really questioning your own assumptions.
Yes, and actively, this is the hard part sometimes, actively seeking out different viewpoints. People who disagree with you. It can feel uncomfortable, but it shows you your blind spots.
Stepping outside the echo chamber.
Definitely. And cultivating a growth mindset, that core belief that you can change, learn, and improve, that makes you much more open to revising your thinking when needed.
So it boils down to being willing to be wrong and seeing that not as failure, but as a chance to learn something new.
Precisely. It's about intellectual humility.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. How does this play out in, say, education? Are schools teaching kids how to unlearn?
Well, there's definitely a big shift happening in education. Less focus on just memorizing facts, rote learning.
Right, the state capitals kind of thing.
Exactly. And more emphasis on critical thinking, problem solving, creativity. These are the skills you need in a world that's changing so fast.
So it's less about the what and more about the why and the how.
You got it. Modern classrooms are using more group projects, discussions, hands-on stuff. Things that make you engage and question.
Mm-hmm.
And technology plays a role too. Adaptive learning systems, even VR, can challenge misconceptions and get students curious in new ways.
So the goal is teaching how to think, not just what to think.
Fundamentally, yes. Unlearning in education means ditching the idea that learning is just about accumulating facts. It's about constantly questioning, refining, understanding how we know what we know.
It almost sounds like the education system itself has had to do some unlearning of its old ways.
That's a very sharp observation. Yes, it has. And it's ongoing. There's more focus now on metacognition, helping students understand their own thinking and learning biases.
Thinking about thinking.
Exactly. And trying to create classrooms where it feels safe to ask questions, to challenge things, to say, I don't understand, or maybe this is wrong, fostering that intellectual humility early on.
Okay, interesting. Now let's jump over to business and leadership. This seems like a place where failure to unlearn could be, well, catastrophic.
Oh, absolutely critical. In business, clinging to outdated strategies or ignoring new market signals because that's how we've always done it, that can be fatal.
You just have to look at history, right? Kodak, Blockbuster.
Perfect examples. Companies that were giants, but they couldn't unlearn their successful established models quickly enough when digital photography or streaming came along. They were too invested in the past. Nokia is another one with mobile phones.
They got stuck defending the old way.
Precisely. Now, contrast that with companies that build in a culture of questioning, of continuous learning. Netflix is the classic case study here.
Right, the DVDs to streaming pivot.
Yeah, and it was a deliberate unlearning. They saw the future, even while their DVD business was still making money, and they consciously shifted resources, attention, everything towards streaming. They essentially unlearned their original successful business.
That took guts. It was a huge risk back then.
A massive risk, and it highlights how important leadership is in this. Leaders have to champion unlearning. Look at Multiply Group. They went from a marketing agency to this global investment firm.
Big change.
Huge. And their CEO talks a lot about intellectual curiosity, about a learning by doing culture, which inherently involves discarding things that don't work anymore.
So for leaders, it's not a one-off thing, it's a mindset.
It has to be. Constantly reevaluating assumptions, trying new things, and crucially, creating an environment where it's okay to experiment and fail. That failure isn't punished, but seen as data, as a learning opportunity. That is practicing unlearning at an organizational level.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's widen the lens again. What about society and culture? It feels like we're in a constant state of needing to unlearn old norms and biases.
We really are. Think about evolving social values around equity, diversity, inclusion, mental health. These all require us to unlearn deeply ingrained societal norms and personal biases.
Challenging stuff.
It is, and many of the huge global challenges we face, climate change is a big one, but also pandemics, inequality, they demand new ways of thinking. The old assumptions, the old ways of operating, they just won't cut it.
Climate change seems like a prime example of needing to unlearn that idea of like endless economic growth at any cost.
Exactly. People like Deborah Dull and Douglas Kent argue that businesses need to fundamentally unlearn that cost at all cost mentality. They have this framework called Unlearn that pushes companies to redefine their purpose beyond just profit, to include protecting the planet. It challenges core assumptions about efficiency.
So unlearning wasteful habits.
Yes, or redefining what waste even means. And then there's the whole digital age aspect, the sheer volume of information and misinformation.
Right, fake news, echo chambers again.
Yeah. It forces us to develop media literacy, to constantly question sources, to actively seek out diverse perspectives, just to counteract the false narratives we might absorb. We have to unlearn passively accepting information.
It feels like society as a whole is slowly starting to value adaptability and maybe a bit more humility.
I think so. There's a growing recognition that knowing everything is impossible and being willing to admit you don't know or that you are wrong is actually a sign of strength.
And technology seems to be turbocharging this whole process, right?
Yeah.
Both creating the need and maybe some of the tools.
Absolutely. Automation, AI, they're changing jobs so fast. The World Economic Forum said something like half of all employees will need reskilling by 2025. That's huge.
Wow. So you have to unlearn old skills or ways of working.
You do. AI is also speeding up how quickly knowledge becomes outdated. They talk about the half-life of everything shrinking. What you learned last year might be irrelevant next year.
That's kind of terrifying.
It can be. And then there are the ethical dimensions, like we need to unlearn biases that might get baked into AI algorithms.
Yeah.
And social media, as we touched on, can create these feedback loops reinforcing our biases. So digital literacy, critical thinking online becomes essential for unlearning harmful patterns. The bottom line is you can't apply old thinking to radically new technological problems. You have to update the mental models.
So, okay, this isn't just theory. Could you give us some more concrete examples, people or companies who've really done this well?
Sure. Think about sports. Serena Williams, after injuries, had to consciously adapt her game, unlearn some of her dominant patterns to stay at the top.
Okay, yeah.
We mentioned Netflix. That pivot is a prime business example. IBM is another interesting one. They've reinvented themselves multiple times over decades, from hardware to services to AI and cloud. Each shift required massive unlearning.
Right, letting go of what made them successful before.
Exactly. Multiply Group, we mentioned, built unlearning into their culture as they grew. And in sustainability, you see supply chain managers having to unlearn decades of focusing solely on speed and cost to now factor in environmental impact, redefining efficiency.
Those examples really drive it home.
Okay.
Okay, so for someone listening right now wanting to get better at this,
Mhm.
what are some practical steps? What can you actually do?
Right, let's make it actionable. First, practice reflection. Regularly take time to question your assumptions. Ask yourself, why do I believe this? Is it still serving me? Is it still accurate?
Just making it a conscious habit.
Yes. Second, actively seek out diversity. Diverse perspectives, different viewpoints. Break out of your bubble. Read things you normally wouldn't. Talk to people with different backgrounds or opinions. It helps challenge your own thinking.
Get comfortable with being uncomfortable, maybe.
That's a good way to put it. Third, foster psychological safety. This is key in teams, but also for yourself. Create an environment where it's okay to be wrong, where admitting mistakes is seen as learning, not weakness, where adaptability is rewarded.
Hmm.
And fourth, really cultivate that growth mindset we talked about. Genuinely believe you can change and develop your understanding. That's foundational.
Okay, those are great starting points. Reflection, diverse views, safety, growth mindset. Are there any, broader frameworks people use?
Yeah, there are a few useful models. Alvin Toffler talked about the learn, unlearn, relearn cycle, just recognizing it's a continuous loop.
Learn, unlearn, relearn. Got it.
Chris Argyris had this idea of double loop learning, which is about not just fixing problems within the current rules, but questioning the underlying rules and assumptions themselves, really digging deep.
Going beyond the surface fix.
Exactly. And in organizations, things like cross-functional projects or job rotations can help break down siloed thinking, force people to unlearn department-specific biases.
Getting different perspectives baked in.
Right. And simply sharing stories, telling positive stories about times when individuals or the company successfully unlearned something that can be really powerful culturally. Plus, formally building it into training helps normalize it.
Okay, so wrapping this up then, the big takeaway seems to be that unlearning isn't about forgetting or throwing everything out.
Not at all. It's about active updating. It's like keeping your mental map current with the actual territory, letting go of the outdated bits to make space for what's accurate now.
And overcoming our brain's natural resistance, those biases, the comfort of the status quo that takes real conscious effort. You have to use these kinds of strategies we talked about.
It does require work. It's not passive.
But the payoff seems huge, right? For personal growth, better decisions, but also for businesses trying to innovate, and even for society, tackling these massive challenges.
Absolutely. It's arguably one of the most critical skills for navigating the world we live in today. Truly transformative.
So here's something for you, the listener, to chew on this week. Think about one belief you hold, or maybe a habit you have. Just one thing that you might be clinging to, maybe without even realizing it, that doesn't really serve you anymore. How could you apply some of these ideas, this unlearning process, to that specific thing? What might happen? What new possibilities could open up if you were actually willing to let it go and update your thinking?
That's a great question to ponder.
Definitely food for thought. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.